April 24th, 1943. U-230 lay in the shadow of her concrete berth, lines removed from the pillars. Her company stood in closed ranks on the aft deck, facing the farewell party on the pier. The men had flowers fastened at their caps or in the buttonholes of their olive-green fatigues. Beneath them, the oily water was beaten up by our screws, which turned silently in reverse. U-230 detached herself gently from the concrete wall and sailed, stern first, out of the shadowy darkness of the protective bunker into the blazing sun. At the same time, a second boat, U-456, separated from another pier and followed in our wake. Her orders were the same as ours. On her bridge I saw Forster, a frequent companion at Madame's, and we waved to each other. Then our boat rapidly increased the distance to land and friends. Once we passed the centre of the bay, everything on board was at war. The actions, the spoken words, and the thoughts. It was as if there had been never a port, never a leave, never a jovial moment at the casino bar, never a night in the arms of a woman. U-230 sped at 17 knots over a smooth surface, under a sky full of high clouds. U-456 raced on parallel course 500 metres to starboard. Astern, the escort disappeared behind the horizon. Ahead, the grey sky blended with the green of the sea. We ran along, keeping a close watch on our radar detection gear. Our boat had been equipped with a new electronic instrument, an improved version of the Biscay Cross. The bulky cross had to be removed before submergence, but the new small antenna of the METOX was welded to the rim of the bridge and offered no interference with our emergency dives. Feeble impulses had been accompanying us ever since we left port. As they increased in volume, U-230 made a perfect routine dive, with U-456 following only seconds behind us. That was when we lost contact with U-456, which continued on her own track into our allotted area. At nightfall we surfaced to try our luck and run for mileage. With a hull full of fresh air and both diesels charging her batteries, U-230 thrust forward. The infinity of the night sky and the dark expanse of the sea fused in the distance and created the illusion that we were sailing through the universe. Alone between heaven and sea, our black boat sped along in the midst of the large phosphorescent whirlpool that she whipped up a perfect target for an alert pilot. While the diesels hammered their steady beats, I counted the minutes that we were allowed to travel on surface. 17 minutes passed. Then there was a screaming radar impulse detection. We dived at once. The nights became our days, and the days became our nights. The hours inside the hull were spent in darkness, lit by a few dim bulbs, and the nights on the bridge were as black as tar. We continued our advance, with our ears tuned to the enemy above, and our eyes glued to the Black Sea, always ready to duck the bombs that came hurtling down from the sky with alarming frequency. And during daytime we floated at a depth of 40 metres, listening to the distant but intimate sounds of propellers, ASDIC pings, and detonating depth charges and bombs. As April gave way to May, we reached the Black Pit area, where no enemy aircraft had yet penetrated. Radar impulses had gradually ceased, and we dared to stay surfaced under the sun again. After playing hide-and-seek for 6 nights and days, after being thrown into shock, dismay, fear and anger by the British audacity, I considered the sun the guarantor of our survival. Its light enabled us to see clearly and far. By using our eyes and the METOX, I was hopeful that we would be able to spot the black flies at safe distance. After we had passed the 15th longitude west, we informed headquarters that we had made safe passage through the Bay of Biscay. 4 hours after base had acknowledged receipt of our message, Riedel received and decoded new instructions. Proceed into Grid Square BD 95. Expect eastbound convoy. The area of operation was far below the stormy northern region, where we had been during the winter months. I expected better shooting conditions, as well as a faster convoy hunt. The strain of the march through the bay was soon erased by a series of beautiful days, undisturbed by enemy planes. May 2nd. The weather was serene, the sea calm and iridescent. At 14:08, Riedel spotted a fast-moving target behind the southern horizon, a loner. We raced at highest speed on a track that would intersect the vessel's mean course. After 3 hours of running, during which we left the cargo ship cautiously behind the horizon, we dived leisurely, having plenty of time before the vessel would become visible. 1 hour later, our hopes of shooting the first torpedo vanished. The ship was identified as a Swedish freighter travelling the Philadelphia route, which we had guaranteed as a safe path for neutrals. After we had allowed the Swede to pass, we intercepted a signal from one of our boats. Convoy in AJ-87, course northeast. Sunk 2, total 13,000 tons. Keep contact. U-192. Grid square AJ-87 lay between Newfoundland and Greenland, far beyond our reach. We had to leave the convoy to wolves patrolling that area. May 5th. U-230 charged toward her allotted square. During the morning we intercepted a signal that confirmed our worst fears. Riedel handed me the deciphered message in silence. Destroyer, attacked, sinking. U-638. This report was the last act of U-638. Nothing was heard of her again. 2 hours later, a fresh distress signal was hastily decoded. Attacked by destroyers. Depth charges, leave boat. U-531. This second alarming call alerted us to the fact that the battle at that convoy had produced unusually fierce countermeasures by its defence. May 6th. It was still dark when another signal from the battlefield flashed across the Atlantic. Attacked by corvette. Sinking. U-438. This third death message angered and puzzled us. What caused this sudden stream of messages which told us of nothing but dying? Now another was intercepted. Aircraft, bombs, rammed by destroyer, sinking. U-125, a fourth casualty. Our anger changed to shock. May 7th, U-230, cruising with extreme caution under a star-strewn sky, intercepted still another last report. Air attack, sinking 47 N05W, U-663. I checked the victim's position on our mildewy chart and marked the spot of her destruction in the centre of the Bay of Biscay with a black cross. She was the 5th boat to go to the bottom within 3 days, but 7 hours later I had to revise the total when, after repeated requests by headquarters to report their positions, U-192 and U-531 had not answered. They had met their fate while attacking that convoy southeast of Greenland. May 10th. It was a sunny day. We arrived in the designated square, a small area almost in the centre of the Atlantic. Here we were supposed to intercept the convoy reported earlier. With us in ambush lurked 6 boats, and many more sailed between our patrol and the British Isles. U-456, our companion since our departure from Brest, hid somewhere behind the horizon. The trap was set, May 11th. Another obituary, again originating in the Bay of Biscay. Attacked by aircraft, sinking. U-528. We were outraged and determined to pay back the loss of our friends 100-fold. 1 hour later we received, as a consolation, attack orders from headquarters. All U-boats in grid square BD intercept eastbound convoy in BD 91. Attack without further orders. At once we set U-230 on a new course at high speed. Her bow split the water ahead into 2 sparkling fountains. Preparing for action, I ordered a complete overhaul of all torpedoes. May 12th. At 4 o'clock, the tension was apparent throughout the boat as I mounted my watch. At 5:40, as the new day dawned, Praga shot several stars and established our position. At 6:20, he reported from below that we had arrived on the convoy's calculated mean track. I reduced our speed and turned U-230 onto a westward course, toward the convoy, cautiously probing ahead. The eastern sky turned blood red as the sun prepared to rise over the horizon. Only a thin line in the west remained dark. 6:15. The sun shot like a fireball out of the ocean. At that spectacular moment, I spotted a smear over the southwesterly horizon. The convoy. I called Siegmann to the bridge and said as he arrived, "I have a present for you, sir." "Thanks, exec. Encouraging news at last." We watched the smudge grow bigger and wider. Soon the captain turned the stern of the boat toward the grey and black fumes. 3 mastheads crept over the sharp horizon in the west and mounted higher. Emerging fully, The 3 ships were seen to be escorts, the sweepers in front of the convoy. They zigzagged closer, moving jerkily like puppets on an empty stage. We proceeded slowly eastward, maintaining safe distance to determine the convoy's exact course. 6:38. Mastheads appeared over a wide section of the horizon. Then the funnels followed. These were the cargo ships, the targets we were after. A mighty display of masts and funnels rose ever higher out of the sea. We were almost dead ahead of the parade, in excellent position. Within 1 hour, I calculated, we would have plenty of targets at our disposal. 6:55. Siegmann acted. Clear the bridge, on diving stations. I was in the conning tower as the alarm bell sounded the call to action. 5 minutes later, the boat was properly trimmed and floated just below the surface. The captain, seated at the scope, informed the crew over our intercom system. We have sighted an extremely large convoy, probably over 100 vessels. We shall attack submerged. I need not remind you that this is no holiday cruise. I expect your utmost effort to make this attack a success. Then he activated the motor of the scope. 7:05. No visible contact yet. Siegmann ordered all tubes prepared for firing. 7:10. I reported U-230 combat ready as the convoy's thumping roar spread through the depths. 7:16. The soundman conveyed news that ruined our plan for a submerged assault. Convoy apparently has changed course. Sound band changed to 310. The captain, visibly annoyed over the unexpected change, raised the scope further into the air to catch a view of the parading fleet. The high-pitched spinning of escorts' propellers echoed through the water, and the grinding noise of the huge armada hit our hull like the beating of countless jungle drums. "Damn dirty trick," muttered Siegmann. "The convoy zigzags to the northeast. There are at least a dozen corvettes spread over its starboard side." The convoy steamed away at 11 knots, while U-230 floated undetected by the outer defence, unwilling to attack till she had passed through the cordon of destroyers. The rhythmical thrashing of 100 propellers penetrated the heavy steel of our hull and bounced forth and back inside the boat. The captain relinquished his seat at the scope, snarling, "Come over here, exec. Take a look. If I only had a faster boat, I could roll up the convoy like a carpet." I swung into the seat. 7 miles on port, I saw an amazing panorama. The entire horizon, as far and wide as I could see, was covered with vessels, their funnels and masts as thick as a forest. At least a dozen fast destroyers cut the choppy green sea with elegance. As many as 24 corvettes flitted around the edges of the convoy. I said in awe, "Quite a display of power, sir. It's probably the largest convoy ever." "You might be right. Once we are close to that wall of ships, our torpedoes can't miss." Before we could risk surfacing to race into a new attack position, we had to put distance between us and the convoy. The swishing of propellers, the pounding of piston engines, the singing of turbines, and the chirping of Aztec pings accompanied us on our clandestine run. For almost 2 hours, we travelled diagonally away from the giants of steel. 9:15, U-230 surfaced. Mounting the bridge while the deck was still awash, I took a hurried look in a circle. Far to the northeast, mastheads and funnels moved along the sharp line which divided the ocean from the sky. U-230 forged through the sea, parallel to the convoy's track, in an attempt to reach a forward position before dusk. Riedel flashed the message of our contact to headquarters and the other wolves in ambush. Convoy BD-92, course northeast 11 knots, strong defence, remain surfaced for attack, U-230 9:55. A startled cry at my back. "Flugzeug!" I saw a twin-engined plane dropping out of the sun. The moment of surprise was total. "Alarm!" We plunged head over heels into the conning tower. The boat reacted at once and shot below surface. At this moment of our maximum danger and minimum ability to act, our lives depended upon a miracle, an accident, or the good luck that had so far saved us from extinction. 4 short, ferocious explosions shattered the water above and around us. The boat trembled and fell at a 60-degree angle. Water splashed, steel shrieked, ribs moaned, valves blew, deck plates jumped, and the boat was thrown into darkness. As the lights flickered on, I saw astonishment in the round eyes of the men. They had every right to be astounded. The attack out of the sun was a complete mystery. Where had the small plane come from? It did not have the range to fly a round trip between the nearest point of land and the middle of the Atlantic. The conclusion was inescapable that the convoy launched its own airplanes. It seemed highly likely, though we did not want to believe it, that the planes returned to convoy and landed on an aircraft carrier. The idea of a convoy with its own air defense smashed our basic concept of U-boat warfare. No longer could we mount a surprise attack or escape without meeting savage counterattacks. 10:35, U-230 came up to periscope depth. A careful check with our skyscope, an instrument similar to the periscope, revealed no aircraft. We surfaced at high speed. The hunt went on. We pressed forward obstinately, with that terrible constriction in the stomach. The diesels hammered hard and pushed the boat swiftly ahead. I glanced only occasionally at the dense picket fence along the horizon and concentrated on the sky. Thickening white clouds scudded along at medium height under a stiff breeze from the west. The wind pitched the water up on deck and once in a while blew a sheet of spray across the bridge. 11:10. I detected a glint of metal between the clouds. It was a small aircraft, and it was diving into the attack. Alarm! 50 seconds later, 4 explosions nearby taught us that the pilot was a well-trained bombardier. Shockwaves rocked boat and crew. Friedrich, struggling to prevent the boat from sinking, caught her at 180 meters, balanced her out, and brought her up to periscope depth. 11:25. U-230 surfaced. We drove forward and clung to the fringes of the convoy with grim determination. Instinct forced us ahead, kept us moving despite the constant threat from above, made us numb to the repetitious detonations. We raced in defiance of fear and sudden destruction, always forward, toward the head of the convoy. 11:42. Aircraft alarm. U-230 plunged into the depths. 4 booms twisted the hull, but the boat survived the savage blows. We waited for the plane to disappear with our hearts beating under our tongues. 12:04. We surfaced in an increasingly choppy sea and surged ahead, the boat jolting and shaking. The convoy had slipped into a northwesterly position, and despite our constant harassment, we had gained considerable headway on it. I spotted the escorts on the horizon, but the real danger lurked above. The clouds had lowered and thickened, covering the last patches of blue sky. 12:08. A call from below reached us on the bridge. Message for Captain, signal just received. Attacked by aircraft, sinking, U-89. Again we were stunned. With a shudder, I pictured what would happen to us once our own hull was cracked. 12:17. Aircraft dead astern, alarm! U-230 dived once more and descended rapidly. I bit my lip and waited for the final blast. At 45 seconds, 4 booms whipped the boat with violent force. Every second we were able to snatch from the pursuing aircraft brought us closer to the convoy and success. But if we dived a second too late, bombs would end our hunt with sudden death. 12:30. We surfaced again. This time only 3 men went to the bridge, the captain, the first seaman's mate, and I. We raced ahead stubbornly, plagued by the thoughts of being annihilated within the hour. 13:15. A twin-engined plane dropped suddenly out of a low cloud, only 800 meters astern. It was too late to dive. After freezing for a horrifying instant, Siegmann yelled, "Right full rudder!" I jumped to the rear of the bridge to shoot while the mate manned the second gun. The small aircraft grew enormous fast. It dived upon us, machine-gunning the open rear of the bridge as the boat turned to starboard. Neither the mate nor I were able to fire a single bullet. Our guns were jammed. The aircraft dropped 4 bombs, which I saw falling toward me, then roared over the bridge so close that I could feel its engine's hot exhaust brush my face. 4 bombs in a row erupted alongside our starboard saddle tanks. 4 high fountains collapsed over the 2 of us at the guns. U-230 was still afloat, still racing through the rising green sea. The aircraft, having used up its bombs, turned and disappeared into the direction of the convoy. 13:23. Our radio mate delivered an urgent message to the captain. Attacked by aircraft, unable to dive, sinking. 45 north, 25 west. Help, U-456. Have Praga check position, Siegmann shouted back. Maybe we can save the crew. The captain's impulse to rescue our comrades might well result in suicide. We were closer to death than to life ourselves. But help was imperative. We would have expected the same. Moments later, Praga reported that U-456 was only 12 miles ahead, 15 degrees to starboard. Immediately, the captain changed course. 13:50. We spotted a plane circling 4 miles ahead. Then my glasses picked up the bow of U-456 poking out of the rough sea. The men clung to the slippery deck and to the steel cable strung from bow to bridge. Most of them stood in the water up to their chests. The aircraft kept circling above the sinking boat, making it foolhardy for us to approach. Another danger prevented rescue. Astern, a corvette crept over the horizon, evidently summoned by the plane. Now our own lives were in jeopardy. We turned away from the aircraft, the escort, and U-456 and fled in the direction of the convoy. 14:22. Aircraft astern! Again, it was too late to dive. The single-engined plane came in low in a straight line exactly over our wake. I fingered the trigger of my gun. Again, the gun was jammed. I kicked its magazine, clearing the jam. Then I emptied the gun at the menace. The mate's automatic bellowed. Our boat veered to starboard, spoiling the plane's bomb run. The pilot revved up his engine, circled, then roared toward us from dead ahead. As the plane dived very low, its engine sputtered, then stopped. Wing first, the plane crashed into the surging ocean, smashing its other wing on our superstructure as we raced by. The pilot, thrown out of his cockpit, lifted his arm and waved for help, but then I saw him disintegrate in the explosion of the 4 bombs which were meant to destroy us. 4 violent shocks kicked into our starboard side astern, but we left the horrible scene unharmed. The downing of the aircraft must have upset the enemy's flight schedule. Minute after minute passed without a repetition of the attacks. Running at highest speed, U-230 gained bearing ahead of the convoy. In about an hour, we approached the calculated intersection with the convoy's track. 15:45. A report from the radio room put our small victory into proper perspective. Depth charges by 3 destroyers. Sinking. U-186. This new loss was the 11th we had heard of since our patrol began. A naval disaster seemed to be in making. But we could not afford a moment of sorrow for all the men who died that one death that every submariner pictures 1,000 times. 16 o'clock. U-230 cut into the projected path of the convoy. I saw 4 columns of ships creep over the sharp horizon in the southwest, headed in our direction. We had to halt them, had to spread fire in their midst and blow gaps in the mass of steel and iron. 16:03. Aircraft bearing 320. We plummeted into depth. 4 detonations, sounding like one, drove the boat deeper and caused rudders and hydroplanes to block in extreme positions. Minutes later, more explosions occurred in the vicinity, but in defiance of our attackers, Siegmann ordered his boat to periscope depth. He raised the scope but downed it instantly, cursing angrily. "Verdammt! The fellow has dropped a smoke bomb and has dyed the water yellow." Despite the dye marking the spot of our submergence, the captain ordered an attack on the convoy before the escorts could attack us. Chirping ASDIC pings, bellowing detonations, and the grinding roar of 100 engines provided grim background music for our assault. 16:38, up periscope. Then, "Tubes 1 to 5 stand ready." "Tubes 1 to 5 are ready," I answered quickly, then held my breath. Siegmann swiveled around to check the opposite side. Suddenly he cried, "Down with the boat, Chief! Take her down for God's sake! Destroyer in ramming position! Down to 200 meters!" I fully expected the bow of a destroyer to cut into the conning tower momentarily. As the boat swiftly descended, the harrowing sound of the destroyer's engines and propellers hit the steel of our hull. It grew so fast and echoed so deafeningly that we were all unable to move. Only our boat was moving, and she went downward much too slowly to escape the blow. An ear-shattering boom ruptured the sea. A spread of 6 depth charges lifted the boat, tossed her out of the water, and left her on the surface at the mercy of 4 British destroyers. The screws of U-230 rotated in highest revolutions, driving us ahead. For seconds there was silence. For seconds the British were baffled and stunned. After a whole eternity, Our bow dipped and the boat sank and sank. A new series of exploding charges lifted our stern with a mighty force. Our boat, entirely out of control, was catapulted toward the bottom 5 miles below. Tilted at an angle of 60 degrees, U-230 tumbled to 250 meters before Friedrich was able to reverse her fall. Floating level at a depth of 230 meters, we thought we were well below the range of the enemy's depth charges. U-230 was speedily rigged to withstand pursuit. Once again we were condemned to sit it out in crushing depths. 16:57. Distinct splashes on surface heralded the next spread. A series of 24 charges detonated in quick succession. The bellowing roar slammed against our boat. The explosions again pushed her into a sharp down tilt, while the echo of the detonations rolled endlessly through depths. 17:16. A new spread deafened us and took our breath away. The boat listed sharply under the shattering blow. The steel knocked and shrieked, and valves were thrown into open position. The shaft packings leaked, and a constant stream of water soon filled the aft bilge. Pumps spouted, the periscope packings loosened, and water trickled into the cylinders. Water everywhere. Its weight forced the boat deeper into the depths. In the meantime, the convoy crawled in a thunderous procession over our boat. 17:40. The uproar was at its peak. A sudden splash told us that we had 10 or 15 seconds to brace against another barrage. The charges went off just beyond lethal range. While the ocean reverberated under the blasts, the bulk of the convoy slowly passed the spot of our slow execution. I pictured the freighters making a detour around the escorts massed above to end our existence. Perhaps we should risk going deeper. I did not know where our limit was, where the hull would finally crack. No one knew. Those who had found out took their knowledge into the depths. For hours we suffered the punishment and sank gradually deeper. In a constant pattern, spreads of 24 charges battered our boat every 20 minutes. At one time we thought we had won. That was when the escorts departed and rushed to take their positions in the convoy. But our hope was short-lived. The hunters had only left the coup de grace to the killer group following in the wake of the armada. 20 o'clock. The new group launched its first attack, then another and another. We sat helpless 265 meters below. Our nerves trembled. Our bodies were stiff from cold, stress, and fear. The mind-searing agony of waiting made us lose any sense of time and any desire for food. The bilges were flooded with water, oil, and urine. Our washrooms were under lock and key. To use them then could have meant instant death, for the tremendous outside pressure would have acted in reverse of the expected flow. Cans were circulated for the men to use to relieve themselves. Added to the stench of waste, sweat, and oil was the stink of the battery gases. The increasing humidity condensed on the cold steel, dropped into the bilges, dripped from pipes, and soaked our clothes. By midnight, the captain realized that the British would not let up in their bombardment, and he ordered the distribution of potash cartridges to supplement breathing. Soon every man was equipped with a large metal box attached to his chest, a rubber hose leading to his mouth, and a clamp on his nose. And still we waited. May 13. Over 200 canisters had detonated above and around us by 1 o'clock. Several times we had used a ruse in an effort to escape. Through an outboard valve, we repeatedly expelled a great mass of air bubbles. These screens of air floated away on the current, reflecting the asdic impulses like a large solid body. But our attackers were fooled into chasing the decoys only twice, and both times they left at least one vessel behind, directly over our heads. Unable to sneak away, we gave up the game and concentrated on conserving our power, our compressed air, and our dwindling supply of oxygen. 4 o'clock. The boat had fallen to 275 meters. We had been under assault for 12 hours, and there was no sign of relief. This day was my birthday, and I wondered whether it would be my last. How many chances could one ask for? 8 o'clock. No lessening of the attacks. The water in the bilges rose above the deck plates and splashed around my feet. The bilge pumps were useless at this depth. Whenever a charge erupted, the chief released some compressed air into the tanks to assure the boat's buoyancy. 12 o'clock. The boat's down angle had sharply increased. Our compressed air supply was dangerously low. and the boat slipped ever farther away. 20 o'clock. The air was thick, and even more so as we breathed it through the hot cartridges. The devil seemed to be knocking on our steel hull as it creaked and contracted under the enormous pressure. 22 o'clock. The barrage increased in violence as dusk closed in on surface. Wild attacks at shorter intervals indicated that the enemy had lost his patience. May 14th. By midnight, we had approached the limit for boat and crew. We had reached a depth of 280 meters, and the boat was still sinking. I dragged myself through the aisle, pushing and tossing men around, forcing them to stay awake. Whoever fell asleep might never be awakened. 3:10. A thunderous spread rattled down, but without effect. We were closer to being crushed by the mounting pressure than by the exploding canisters. As the echo of the last blast slowly subsided, something else attracted our attention. It was the thrashing of retreating propellers. For a long time we listened to the fading sound, unable to believe that the Tommies had given up the hunt. 4:30. For over an hour there was silence. We spent all that time doubting our luck. We had to make sure, so we turned on our freshwater producer, went high with the motors. No reaction from above. Using the last of our compressed air and battery power, the chief managed to lift the overloaded boat meter by meter. Then, unable to slow her upward movement, Friedrich let her rise freely and yelled, "Boat rises fast! 50 meters! Boat has surfaced!" U-230 broke through to air and life. We pushed ourselves up to the bridge. Around us spread the infinite beauty of night, sky, and ocean. Stars glittered brilliantly, and the sea breathed gently. The moment of rebirth was overwhelming. A minute ago we could not believe that we were alive. Now we could not believe that death had kept his finger on us for 35 gruesome hours. Abruptly I felt the impact of the oxygen-rich air upon my system. Almost losing consciousness, I sagged to my knees and slumped over the rim of the bridge. There I stayed until I regained my faculties. The captain recovered quickly, and we congratulated each other on another miraculous survival. Then the captain called out, "Both diesels half ahead. Steer 180. Ventilate boat. Secure from action stations." Siegmann had thrown the dice again. The diesels coughed to life. Since the convoy had disappeared long ago, we travelled south toward our last position. The engines muttered reassuringly, topping off our drained batteries and pushing the boat toward a new sunrise. The bilges were emptied, the foul air expelled, and the accumulated refuse thrown overboard. When the darkness dissolved and a new day dawned, U-230 was again ready for combat. Still numb from the murderous assault and stiff from the cold depth, we added up our account. 3 U-boats in our group had been sunk. Well over 100 Allied ships had ploughed past us, and we had not been able to sink a single one. We might now expect that some 700,000 tons of war material would safely reach the British Isles. It was not a pretty picture. The day promised to become a good one. Praga lifted his heavy frame to the bridge and shot several stars before the sun wiped them off the sky. I lit up a cigarette and watched the sunrise. The sky changed from dark blue to violet, turned purple and then bloody red. I remembered an old saying, "Red sky in the morning, early death's warning," and wondered what the day might bring. 7:10. "Smoke clouds dead ahead," reported the first mate. All glasses spun to bear on a smudge over the horizon in the southwest. There was no doubt about it. We had sighted a second convoy. At that moment it occurred to me the escorts had left us knowing that we would sooner or later fall into the hands of destroyers in the following convoy. 7:20, U-230 dived. The crew, without sleep for at least 70 hours, manned their stations wearily. They had hollow cheeks, pale faces, red eyes. Their haunted glances told me they understood things had changed drastically, that they knew they were nearer to the ocean floor than to port. I walked through the compartments, clapped a shoulder here, made a joke there, and managed to say some encouraging words. 7:45. A voice came through the tube. "From soundman to captain, propeller noise wanders to starboard. Enemy's course must be east, not north." The captain muttered an oath into his beard, searched again with the scope, spotted nothing, then ordered the boat to surface. It suddenly struck me that the event had a certain similarity to the one we had experienced 3 days before. 7:50. The two of us rushed through the hatch, surveyed the sky, and located the convoy. It was obvious that the parade had made its morning zigzag and was now travelling away from us, just as the previous convoy had done. What had seemed an easy catch was suddenly beyond reach. Without further consideration, we began the chase. 8:22. Aircraft from the sun! A rapid dive brought us well below the detonating bombs. The chief raised the boat immediately, and soon we floated at periscope depth. The sky was empty. Seconds later, Siegmund snapped up the periscope handles, stood up as the scope hissed back into its tube, and cursed angrily. "The devil with these birds, that plane has dropped a smoke bomb. Let's get away from here, Chief. Surface with high speed." 8:32. U-230 raced east and away from the thick black fumes that marked our position. Far off, astern to starboard, the masses of ships revealed their masts and funnels. Corvettes and destroyers zigzagged in a striking display of coordinated power. 8:55. A twin-engine plane attacked from behind. U-230 went down within seconds. 4 bombs tore the sea. 9:15. We broke surface and chased forward, always ahead. A distress signal was handed to Siegmund on the bridge. Air attack. Sinking. U-657. Again, every hand aboard wondered how long it would take until we too would be delivered to our maker. 10:05. Alarm! An airplane had materialized as if by magic. U-230 crash-dived in record time. When the thunder of the detonations subsided, the boat was still afloat. We surfaced and crash-dived again and again. We ducked the blows, we trembled, shuddered, and vibrated under the heaviest barrages. The boat broke slowly under the murderous attacks. Her rivets burst, her bolts cracked, her hull was dented, and her ribs bent. But she still obeyed orders, and the captain drove her mercilessly into firing position. By sunset, Siegmund's tenacious pursuit seemed about to be rewarded. Hidden from the escorts by the curvature of the earth, we had worked ourselves miles ahead of the convoy. But then one of the flying devils forced us below again. And as the convoy rocked and pounded through the sea, our men swiftly occupied their action stations, suspense carved into their faces. With stern determination, I prepared torpedoes and crew for a battle on surface. My hopes failed unconditionally. In the turmoil and uproar of the approaching convoy, 3 escorts had somehow managed to zero in on our spot of submergence. Siegmund yelled in surprise, "Achtung! Dive to 200 meters! Brace for depth charges!" Seconds later, the sweepers presented us with an extravagant gift. A thick layer of depth charges exploded in an enormous eruption that dwarfed all previous barrages. Darkness followed the terrible quake. I pulled myself up the steel ropes of the scope, aimed the beam of my flashlight at the depth gauge, saw with horror its needle swinging rapidly, saw the 2 plainsmen dangling at their wheels in confusion, listened to the chief's desperate commands, and heard the shocking sound of splashing water. This was how the curtain went up for another long siege, an exact duplicate of the persecution we had just endured. As dusk settled upon the hunters above, the wind faded with the day and the sea smoothed, and as a result their bombardment increased in violence. The fierce salvos made the ocean roar and rumble. We shivered and sweated. We were both hot and cold as we neared the limits of human endurance. As the night wore on, deadly fumes escaped from our batteries. We were half poisoned and nearly unconscious. And when the sun rose for our assailants, they renewed their bombardment with over 300 charges by actual count. It was all in vain. U-230 stayed afloat some 280 meters below. In the afternoon, we faced the fact that we had absolutely no more leeway, no more air to breathe. We now had to choose between suicide and surrender. In a last effort to steal another hour from death or imprisonment, Friedrich released some compressed air into the midship buoyancy tank to raise the boat. The hissing sound attracted our assailants' attention. A ferocious blast pulled the boat upward. As the air in her tanks expanded, she rose with increasing speed. But then a battery of canisters detonated, violently slamming into her starboard side, sending her down again for the final crush. We crawled through the centre aisle to distribute our weight, even though we were sure this was our end. Then, very gently, U-230 levelled off near the 300-metre mark and vibrated in her last convulsive shakes. The men bit the mouthpieces of their rubber hoses, drawing hot air through the potash cartridges, incessantly coughing. 8 minutes after the blast, 6 more depth charges exploded astern. Then all remained silent for a long while, for well over an hour. There was not a ping, not a beep, not a sound from above. Having survived past the absolute limit of our air supply, we tempted the Tommies into a move with a hammer blow against the hull. There was no reaction. U-230 began her slow ascent. 1955. The lid of the hatch to the bridge flew open. Siegmann and I were thrown up to the bridge by the tremendous overpressure that had built up inside the hull. Radiant sunshine, air in overabundance, but no enemy as far as the eye could see. After a careful check of sky and sea, we assessed our damages. The starboard aft oil bunker was broken wide open. Diesel oil had washed away, leaving a long, treacherous trail of iridescent colours in our wake. To the enemy, a large oil slick was an unmistakable evidence of a direct hit. That was why the British had departed. However, the boat was a shambles. 2 tanks were ruptured, the starboard shaft was bent, the starboard diesel foundation was cracked, and countless smaller damages were reported. A large amount of fuel had been lost. A continuation of the mission was impossible. Even our return to base was highly doubtful. At 21:05, Riedel transmitted a message to headquarters, advising Admiral U-boats of our condition and the massive air defence in the centre of the Atlantic. He added that 2 convoys had gotten away without our being able to launch a single torpedo. But our many lost chances to add tonnage to our credit seemed insignificant when compared to our unexpected survival. Only a special providence had allowed us to live while so many others had perished in the sea. On the evening of May 15th, at the end of the 4-day battle, it was confirmed that U-456 had been lost and that 2 more boats had followed her to the bottom. U-266 and U-753 had never answered headquarters' summons to report their position. The result of the fight was that 6 U-boats had been sunk, and the 7th was battered and unable to continue. It was a disaster of the greatest magnitude, and the second one in the month of May. The Allied counter-offensive at sea had struck with frightening power and accuracy. U-230 limped east through the vastness of the Atlantic. Luckily, no aircraft was sighted for 2 consecutive days. However, the calm was punctuated by a string of desperate signals from boats in distress. Decoding the death messages had become a normal part of our shipboard routine. The messages piled up on the captain's table, and in reading them I half expected to see one from U-230. Bombed by aircraft, sinking. U-463 have lost contact, attacked by aircraft. U-640 attacked by destroyer, sinking. U-128 destroyers, aircraft, unable to dive. U-528 attacked by aircraft, sinking. U-646. Nothing was ever heard again of these boats. The thought of our destruction haunted us, as more of the death cries were intercepted. It could be only hours, days at the most, until the killers would catch up with us and bring us death in our iron coffin. May 18th. At dawn we were instructed to refuel at high sea from U-634 in Grid Square, B-81 on May 21st, May 19th. The British scored 2 hits. U-954 and U-273 were bombed and sunk almost simultaneously. Their signals were identical, only the place of their dying was different. May 21st. U-230 cruised for hours at the spot of rendezvous. By 13:15 we had begun to doubt the existence of U-634, but then Borchert with his magic eyes spotted the boat. 40 minutes later we sailed alongside her. I discovered that her captain was Dahlhaus, an old friend from my minesweeping days in Holland. We strung rubber hoses from boat to boat while drifting parallel before the wind, and the pumps transferred 15 tons of diesel oil into our tanks. The fueling took almost 2 hours, 2 helpless hours of nervous waiting for airplanes to dive upon us. None appeared. With great relief, we separated from U-634 and both boats set course for Brest. May 23rd. U-230 crossed the 15th longitude west, the door to Biscay Bay and Purgatory. We intercepted more bad news. A signal from U-91 told us that they had seen U-752 attacked and destroyed by aircraft. There were no survivors. At 10:40 we crash-dived before a Sunderland airplane. No radar impulses. Quite obviously it must have attacked on sight. It announced the start of a 6-day nightmare. Under cover of darkness, U-230 made her dash at a pitiful top speed of only 12 knots. We crash-dived 7 times and shook off 28 attacks by bombs or depth charges. By sunrise, we were stunned, deaf, and exhausted. We disappeared in the floods for the rest of the day. May 24th. Apparently the British were aware that 2 U-boats were running for port. Their aircraft seemed to be looking for us, including the land-based 4-engined bombers. During that night, we crash-dived 9 times and survived a total of 36 bombing runs. May 25th. 3 hours after daybreak, we floated into the deadly range of a hunter-killer group. Running submerged in absolute silence, we managed to slip by the endless, cruel, ravenous pings. 1 hour before midnight, we surfaced into the inevitable air assaults. On the first attack, 4 ferocious detonations rocked the boat as she surged into the deep. Suddenly there was a flash in the rear of the control room. A stream of sparks shot across the narrow space and enveloped us in choking smoke. The boat was afire. It seemed impossible to bring her to surface before we died. The round doors of the 2 bulkheads were slammed shut, the compartments sealed. Several men fought the fire with extinguishers. U-230 rose sharply toward the surface, where only seconds before the aircraft had dropped its diabolic calling card. Thick fumes choked us. Fire leaped from wall to wall. I pressed my handkerchief against mouth and nose and followed the captain into the tower. The boat levelled off. She had surfaced. We hastened to the bridge. Somebody threw ammunition magazines on deck. The port diesel began to mutter. Red light and fumes escaped the hatch. We drove like a torch through the blackest night until the men below managed to kill the fire. That night, we outmanoeuvred 7 attacks and outlasted 28 bombs. May 26th. It was the 4th day of our run for life and port. We floated at 40 metres, listening to a depth charge barrage many miles to the west. It lasted all day. At 22:30 we surfaced. The night was very dark. Over an hour passed without radar detection. Then we saw a huge spotlight hanging in the sky, growing bigger with insane speed, drenching the bridge in daylight, blinding us. A 4-engined Liberator came roaring down, guns blazing. The boat swung toward the fast-approaching light. The giant roared over our bridge and catapulted into the night, showering the bridge with sparks and hot air. 4 bombs exploded, bellowing barbarously. My legs were jarred into my body at each concussion. Moments later came the call from below. "Boat is tight, ready for dive." When U-230 was balanced in protective depth, Siegmund stormed into the radio room, up to the mate who had failed to warn us of a radar detection. "What the hell is the matter, Kastner? Are you asleep? You nearly got us all killed." "Sir, there was no impulse," the mate protested. "And our gear is in order?" "Don't tell me any stories, Kastner," hollered Siegmund. "The entire crew is in your hands. If you fail again, our skins aren't worth a penny." May 27th. We surfaced, low on power and air. Tension was at a peak. My nerves twitched and my tongue was hot and dry. I reckoned that we would have no chance for survival if another attack occurred immediately. But for long minutes the roar of our 1 diesel and the sigh of the air intake was the only sound we could hear. After an hour of grace, time ran out again. A white shaft of light suddenly engulfed the bridge. The beam came at us from starboard aft. Again a giant Liberator swooped down, its guns emitting small red flames, its bullets missing our heads by only centimetres. Then the plane roared into the night, headlight turned off. 4 bomb bursts sent geysers of water into the air. The boat was violently shaken, but emerged without further damage. We dived immediately. As I passed the captain in his nook, he was unbuttoning his salt-caked leather jacket. Looking up, he said, "I concede, exec. There were no radar impulses. Our METOC seems to be in perfect order. The British must have invented a new kind of radar. It's the only explanation I can think of. We were stunned. First, the aircraft carrier, now a new electronic trick that permitted British planes to locate us without betraying their own position. There was no longer a reason for travelling submerged by day and on surface at night. We had to reverse our tactic and travel the surface during the day, when we could see our adversaries with the naked eye. Shooting it out in daylight seemed better than being hacked to pieces at night. At 7:20 we surfaced. Our prospects of winning the last 170-mile dash to port were not at all promising. We spotted 4 Sunderlands and 5 Liberators. 9 times we crashed into depth and received the blood-curdling baptisms. 9 times we surfaced and ploughed ahead. We reached the continental shelf that afternoon. At nightfall, we informed headquarters that we would be at the pickup point the following morning at 8 o'clock. Then, taking no more chances in this new war at sea, we dived. On May 28th, at 12:40, U-230 sailed into the inner harbour of Brest. With her aft deck largely submerged and her superstructure damaged, she gave everyone on the pier a broad hint of what we had gone through. There was no band playing the military tunes. Only the girls with the flower bouquets reminded us of the glorious past. The Commandant 9th Flotilla and his party showed signs of shock. We were hastily and unceremoniously transported to the compound. But once we were ushered into the reception hall, our landlubber hosts tried hard to make our homecoming a pleasant one. After the party, I returned to my room, the same room that I had abandoned 5 weeks before. My belongings had already been delivered from storage. As I retrieved the envelope containing my testament from one valise, I felt an overpowering gratitude. I had survived. In my mail, I found only 2 letters from Marianne. A multitude of strange thoughts flashed through my mind. Then a small parcel from home distracted me. Mother had sent me a birthday cake. It was already 4 weeks old and had hardened and broken into many pieces. But I wished to honour my mother's belief in her son's longevity, so I ate a piece of the cake anyway. The strenuous routine of the 2 days in port stripping our boat and bringing her into dry dock kept me from brooding over our misfortune. But I was reminded of our wrecked mission the next morning. I was at the pier by chance when U-634 finally sailed into harbour 3 days late. I thanked Dahlhaus for his help, this time with a handshake. Nevertheless, I managed to suppress my morbid thoughts, to forget that death had been my constant companion during the month of May. With the self-renewing vigour of youth, I went out to embrace the hot and fast life in port. I joined my friends, those who had made it back from patrol in a turbulent night in the casino bar. We celebrated everyone's birthday and danced with all of Madame's beauties. Madame had replenished her staff with several exotic flowers, ranging in colour from white to yellow and coconut brown. Janine was as loving as ever, no matter that she gave her love to my friends in my absence. It might well prove their last hours of love and life. In fact, the U-boat war was fast becoming one long funeral procession for us. The Allied counter-offensive at sea had struck with unexpected and unprecedented force. The British and Americans had quietly, steadily massed their forces. They had increased their fleet of fast corvettes, built a number of medium-sized aircraft carriers, and converted a number of freighters into pocket-sized carriers, assembled squadrons of small planes for carrier duty, as well as huge armadas of long-range land-based bombers. Then they hit with sudden power, and in 38 cases, with frightening precision. This was the count of U-boats they had sunk in that fateful May of 1943. In those U-boats, many of my friends and classmates had met their end. Unless headquarters produced dramatic countermeasures, all our proud new U-boats would be turned into a terrible surplus of iron coffins. It was estimated that the overhaul of U-230 would take at least 4 weeks. Since I was eligible for a prolonged leave, I made plans for a stop in Paris, a visit at home, and a week with Marianne in the hot summer sun on the beach of the Wannsee in Berlin. Yes, my leave was a long one, but I was all too aware that my time was limited. One evening in early June, having turned over my business to Riedel, I set off on an express to Paris. As the train flashed through the French countryside, I imagined hearing familiar sounds. hammering diesels, depth-charge explosions, the detonations of bombs and torpedoes, the breaking of ships and the roar of the ocean. But it was only the unfamiliar noise of the train wheels as they clicked over the joints of the tracks. I arrived in Paris's Gare de Montparnasse while the morning was still fresh and new. A cab took me to my hotel near the Place Vendôme, which had been commandeered for naval officers. I had decided to remain unattached during my short stay in town, but the abundance of aggressive girls soon tested my resolve. I hurried into the cool halls of the Louvre and spent most of the day strolling through the Galerie d'Apollon, the Grande Galerie and the Salle des Caryatides, where, according to legend, many Huguenots had been hanged from the rafters. In the evening I went to an elaborate restaurant near the opera and dined in solitude and pomp. Then I wandered down the Boulevard des Capucines, declined several offers of commercial love, and retreated into the comforting silence of my hotel room. The next day, time stood still for me. In the morning I walked through the Place de Pigalle, consumed a large breakfast in a small café in Montmartre, climbed the long stairway to Sacré-Cœur. I spent the afternoon and evening in luxurious idleness in the streets and cafés of the left bank. Paris, beautiful Paris. How I hated to leave her. But at 22 o'clock I boarded my train for Germany. The morning sun was riding high when my express pulled into Frankfurt station. I noticed at once that the huge glass dome spanning the tracks was badly damaged. All the glass had been smashed in air raids, leaving only a naked steel skeleton. The sight made a gloomy prelude to my visit. As always, I returned home without notification, and when Mother answered the bell, she glanced at me as if I were a stranger. After a second, I said, "Hello, Mother. You might as well let me in. It's good to be back." I noticed that Mother was unusually nervous, and that she had lost considerable weight. I believed I also noticed a hint of grief in her face. But instead of asking her questions, I tried to please her. "I'm really glad I can stretch my legs under. Your table again." Naturally, she asked me whether I had enough to eat, insisted that I had become too thin, and wanted to know all about my health. "Tell me, did you have enough underwear to keep yourself warm? You might not know, but we have given away whatever clothes we could spare to our soldiers on the Russian front. We have contributed all your shoes and your ski outfits as well as the skis. Tell me also, how is the war in the Atlantic? We don't hear as much anymore about the U-boats." I told her that she would soon hear again of our successes, but having made up my mind that I would not discuss the war, I changed the subject. "How is everybody? How is Trudy doing? Has she seen her husband lately?" "Trudy is fine, just fine," she said. "Hans was here on Easter. We had his parents too. They had some serious air raids in Dusseldorf and have left for the Black Forest to wait until things turn better. We also had some heavy attacks recently, but not as bad as they have been elsewhere." Then I asked, "How is Father?" And Mother burst out crying. With the tears running down her cheeks, she told me that he had been taken away. The Gestapo had arrested him 3 months ago. He was still imprisoned at the city jail in the Hammelsgasse. Mother sobbed, "I didn't tell you in my letters. I didn't want you to know." Torn between disbelief and outrage, I managed to extract from her a vague account of what had happened. Father had maintained a more than just friendly and occasional relationship with a young woman. She had been one of his employees, and he had kept her on the payroll for a long time. One day he had asked Mother for a divorce to marry the girl, but this was not the reason for Father's arrest. The trouble was that the woman he loved was Jewish, and that, according to the government's doctrine, was a crime. He had committed another crime by hiding her from persecution. Unfortunately, somebody had found out and reported that the girl was Jewish, and so the Gestapo had seized the girl and Father. They had put her into a camp and Father into jail. I was shocked and angered by Father's imprisonment, but I was not surprised by the injustice of it. He had suffered before at the hands of our government. Back in the winter of 1936, Father's business, a finance company, had been closed down by edict, along with 36 similar firms. Simply because such companies no longer fit the policies of the leaders of the Third Reich, Father was deprived of his life's work without warning, explanation, or appeal, and he had to start all over again at the age of 46. It was only through ingenuity and hard work that he managed to build up a new business and provide for his family. Soon afterward, the government's ideological nonsense produced far uglier results. I myself had witnessed the Crystal Night in Frankfurt in 1938, when the mob had raged through the streets, smashing the windows and plundering the stores of Jews, while the police stood by and did nothing. The mob tossed furniture out of apartment windows, threw pianos over balcony railings, flung down china, books, lamps, and household utensils. And when everything of value had been stolen, the rest was piled up and burned in huge bonfires. I remembered how my father had led me through the flaming wreckage to help a Jewish friend, only to find his apartment ransacked and vacant. It was then that I saw Father in anger and with tears in his eyes. To us, the Crystal Night was shameful and tragic, but my father was not a rebel in search of hopeless causes, and neither was I. I knew that something was seriously wrong in the country I loved, but the war caught me up when I was 19, and I had neither the time nor the political interest to investigate. Now, however, I was inextricably entangled in an affair that made me feel like a flaming rebel, and I would have to see it through even if I damaged my position and my military career. Immediately I walked to Gestapo headquarters in the Lindenstrasse, a short distance from our home. My uniform and decorations got me past the guards without an interrogation. As I entered a large hall, a secretary at a desk near the entrance asked me whether she could help. "I want to see Obersturmbannführer von Molitor, please." I put on a pleasant smile and handed her my calling card, adding, "It will be a surprise for Herr von Molitor." I assumed he seldom saw a U-boat man, much less one whose father was behind bars.